I have been teaching at the Catholic University of Avila since 2008. I had the opportunity to meet some of the presenters today. And I'm going to do a little introduction, because I would like to take away the least possible time from their own time, in order to give them a turn to present their communications. Well, first of all, we present Dr. Professor Valentina Gaudiano. She comes from Sofia University Institute in Udine, in Cisaldarno, Florence, Italy. She's Associate Professor of Philosophical Anthropology and History of Contemporary Philosophy. She belongs to the Department of Theology, Philosophy, and Human Sciences. She's a facilitator of philosophical dialogue with young people. She defines herself as such. And she's trainer for teachers and educators in philosophical dialogue. She's member of a research group on the theology of love in collaboration with the Teresianum, and partner of the editorial board of the journal Teresianum. She's member of the international group New Voices, linked to the Center for the History of Women Philosophers and Scientists, and her main research areas are German phenomenology, Stein, Scheller, Husserl, Hemmerle, Konrad Marcus, Walter, and Trinitarian ontology, with focus on feelings, love, empathy, intersubjectivity, concept of person, male and female, gender issues, and trans and post-humanism. Her recent publications, very recent indeed, all in 2023, are, among others, Sense of Belonging and Disillusionment, a phenomenological reading of community dynamics. Well, I translated into English, if you don't mind, from Italian. A second paper, Loving the Being Who is Love, a phenomenological reading of the dynamics of loving, in Italian. Another third paper, Thinking About Women, Thinking of Women, the Power to Unite in the Intertwining of Life and Thought. Another paper in Italian. Other one, The Question About the Human Being, a challenge that is still correct. And finally, From the Human Logos to the Divine Logos, Implications of the Christian Logos question, Klaus Hemmerle. This in English. Well, all these interesting papers are a good introduction for her communication, the title of which is The Contribution of Education to the Individual and Social Aspect of the Human Person. We are just welcoming Dr. Valentina Gaudiano for her interesting communication. All yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I hope it will be interesting. So, for some time now, there has been talk of an educational crisis, and even more of an anthropological crisis. If one allows the Steinian consideration that there is no pedagogy without an anthropological vision, it is evident that an educational crisis can only take place within a broader crisis of the human person. A series of sociocultural phenomena question us, as never before, perhaps, about our humanity, particularly in its being in relation to others. We often speak of unaffectivity, of a growing collective unease. The educational agencies, and I'm looking in particular to the Italian case closest to me, do not always work in concert towards shared goals. More often than not, the family delegates the educational task to others, renouncing its own role as the primary educational agency, and at the same time, there is a considerable weakening of the sense and strength of the contribution of the entire community to the formation of the individual, as well as of the specific structures dedicated to this. Faced with the disappearance of a cultural frame of reference in which to also find a relationship with the transcendent and with the sphere of theater production, with the developing advance of virtual realities and the consequent exposure to images, sounds, and words conveyed by tools, faced with a disconnect from nature and its rhythms, individual conflicts between the rational dimension and the psychospiritual dimension, as well as between the private and public spheres, have become more acute with explicit or subtle personal and social implications. The access of the electronic in everyday life has even accentuated widespread autistic tendencies, with a relative lack of social cohesion in a precarious balance between narcissistic hyper-individualism and liquid society. Completing the picture is the increasing interface or interference, of science and technology in school systems, which leading to specialization in the acquisition of skills that can be trafficked into economic and industrial system, has made them subservient to the various market systems. It is a complex picture, which in some ways is harsh and discouraging, but this, like every crisis, can be an opportunity for change and renewal. The question how we consider education in historical conditions and within a cultural horizon characterized by the increasingly marked exhaustion of the humanism of the religious and philosophical traditions and the new overbearing advent of a sort of scientific technological posthumanism, which in large measure is markedly scientific. If educators, teachers, and trainers are put in a position to restore horizons of meaning in this time, which no longer seems to have any meaning, then it will be possible to face the crisis and make it a springboard towards a future that knows how to make the most of today's potential. After a century away from us, Yiddish science anthropological educational proposal is offered to us with great relevance and acumen, especially for the attention not only for the personal but also for the social dimension of the human. The anthropological vision developed by Stein tells us that the human person is a unity of closely interconnected plants, living body, soul, and spirit. This psychophysical unity is not given once and for all in a complete manner, but is subject to development and growth. And this movement is twofold. It comes from within, every living being carries within itself the form it is to become, and from without. The environment and above all other human beings contribute in their own way to stimulating and or inhibiting the development process. I quote Stein, the free person is handed over to their self, that means the body and soul are subject, though not unconditionally, to the guidance of the will. Human beings can take from their surroundings the nourishment available to body and soul, can choose what is healthy and reject what is harmful. But they can also not do so, can let themselves go, and consequently have only themselves to blame if they remain uncultivated, ungebildet, or deformed, verbildet. End quote. Therefore, the continuous exercise of a life consists in making all one's strengths to contribute to the development of one's own person, in dialogue with the world to which one belongs, in a constant balance between self-formation and formation to the communities and contexts to which one belongs. This fact is linked to our being structurally open to the world and therefore relational. I quote again, the human being is both an individual and a member of the community, but not in perfect unity. Individuality and being a member of a community stand side by side in the person, end quote. Each person is placed in a continuous tension between self and other. A tension that is all the more positive and constructive, the more both these dimensions can grow and mature in dialogue with each other. The tension between individuality and community, belonging, is manifest from birth, since, I quote, it is in the family that the child comes into existence. Through the family, they receive their existence, they grow under its care and safeguarding, thinking, feeling, and acting with others with others. Those living in the community, they learn to think, feel, and act. They grow as a member of the community, but at the same time also as an individual, since the individual nature that comes into the world with them begins to awaken, lives and operates in the acts they perform and within and with the community, giving them its own imprint. End quote. From the family, then, each human being opens up to farther community contexts, some of which are more properly places for the formation of the person, while others are places of social coexistence, whether chosen or accidental. They too, according to Stein, play a decisive or indirect pedagogical role, being at the same time structurally constituted in such a way as to have a character that distinguishes us and makes us unique in our individuality, together with belonging to the same species. It does not mean that everyone's development and growth proceeds in a linear and automatic way, especially the openness to the community dimension in the profound sense that Stein understands by community and our proper relationship with it is not taken for granted. Indeed, I quote, individuals are not born ready-made members of the community, but need, in order to be so, to be educated, formed, shaped, end quote. Hence the need to develop a sense of the formative process of the individual, as well as in parallel of community entities. The material that has to be molded, I quote, consists on the one hand of the psychophysical predispositions that human being inherits with them from birth, then of the material for construction that has to be continually taken in from outside and incorporated into the organism. The body assimilates it from the material world, the soul from its spiritual environment, from the world of people and goods that are meant to nourish it, end quote. There exists in everyone a certain individual form that moves their psychophysical forces toward their development and fulfillment in an autonomous manner. But for this fulfillment to be complete, intervention of external agents is necessary, especially other people with spiritual capacity interacting with the individual certain capacity stimulates their growth and expansion. There is a kind of circularity in the development of human existence. On one hand, each person is called upon personally to take charge of his or her own life and ensure that it is developed to the full and according to his or her personal nature. On the other hand, in doing so, each person is helped by the presence of and especially by the specific interaction with other human beings. Stein distinguishes here the external contribution into voluntary or intentional, that which is planned, just looking here at the family, the school, in all contexts is specifically dedicated to education or training, and the completely random contribution of the environment in which one lives. The mature human being is capable by virtue of the spiritual freedom of voluntary opening or closing their self to these external influences, thus working on their information in a harmonious and balanced manner. Fundamental, therefore, is not only the personal relationship we have endowed with our own person and with what Stein calls object endowed with value and goods, but every relationship we have with other people, since with them we enter the world of other people's values. Thus, a new community always arises between the two or more who made an entry into relationship of reciprocity, and it is a community of shared values. The human being, I quote, is from birth a human being with everything that, according to previous reflections, belongs to being human. This also implies that initially he or she has the potential to be everything that is proper to being human, and that actually only comes about slowly and gradually. What and how it develops depends on environmental influences. End of quote. Openness to the other, to the individual as well as to the collective, requires precisely a constant balancing act between being aware of one's own value and uniqueness and recognizing the value of others as a person like me. We can speak then of a bond of interdependence between the individual and the community, such that one cannot fully understand the human being apart from the community, nor the community apart from the individual members that contribute it. Because the character of the community depends on the individual particularity of its members, and this in turn can be understood from the community to which they belong. It seems to me that this reflects the ambiguous or paradoxical condition of the human being that Edith Stein summarizes in her contribution Bildung und Entfaltung der Individualität, when she states that the human being is both an individual and a member of a community, even if these two dimensions are not always and automatically in harmony with each other. The relationship between these two poles is a threshold relation, since both are not in themselves perfect and complete, but in continuous becoming and formation, and as such they fulfill us by growing together according to a process of continuous formation. It becomes then necessary and fundamental to the development of the human person as a whole to reform not only to the self, but to the community life, precisely because, I quote, the human being does not come into the world as a member of the community already nice and done, because they are being a member of the community and the community itself has first developed. And because in the dual nature of the human being, that of being an individual and that of being a member of the community, there are inherent potential conflicts and dangers that can perhaps be avoided with appropriate training. End of quote. In this sense, Stein develops not only general reflections of formation on formation, as self-formation or formation of the self, but also an analysis of what she calls social formation. It is influenced not only by the philosophical framework she had developed in other texts and contexts here, but also by her understanding of the human being as a creative being. That means deriving from a God who, in a Christian way, reveals himself as a communion of persons. For Stein, it is precisely the relationship with God that explains the reason not only for this twofold dimension of the human, but also of the relational effort inherent in it. While not being God, but being similar to him, we are intimately called to the communitarian relationship, even though we cannot live it in absolute perfection. There are therefore in each of us individual and social forces that live in competition and can fall into real conflict if we do not intervene through an awareness of these and through a comprehensive training process, which means one that knows how to take into account the different directions of development that need to be harmonized. Adequate pedagogical work that responds to human nature and therefore requires the ability to coordinate the individual and the various community expressions immediately related to it, following a process of continuous balancing between the extreme tendencies of individualism and the opposite tendencies of what Stein calls socialism. When the personal process of self-education is grafted onto an educational accompaniment that predominantly or even exclusively emphasizes only one of these two aspects, imbalances are created, not only in the individual, but consequently in the entire fabric of the community to which he or she belongs. In an absolutely perfect idea model, we shall be able to say that the individual characteristic of each human being allows him or her to find a natural place within a community context, to occupy a specific place in it because it clearly corresponds to his or her qualities and it's recognized as such not only by the individual but also by the community as a whole. In fact, as Stein clearly states, I quote, we all know how little reality itself corresponds to this beautiful image, end quote. Very often, quite a number of people go to great lengths to achieve certain goals, to occupy certain positions, but these are not at all suitable for them, or they are burdened by others with expectations and commitments for which they are not suited. How does this happen? According to Stein, there is no doubt that these inconsistencies between individual and social forces are due to the fact that insufficient attention is paid to self-knowledge, and thus to self-education, which should lead each person in accordance with and complemented by training from outside to develop those talents and skills that fully express him or her, respecting their own absolutely unique and irreplaceable nature. The human being, I quote, comes into the world endowed with a set of talents, but these, end of quote, but these must be translated into tasks and exercise, both through the enaction and proposal of others to support a child, and then in discovering more and more autonomously how and in what specific direction to move those talents. The basis of this contradiction, which then translates into conflict between the individual and society, is the broken communion with God. Such considerations, halted affirmed a century ago, remain profoundly relevant and valid even today in a social cultural context such as the one outlined at the beginning of our reflections, which is very different from the one Stein experienced and addresses new challenges, which would certainly be unthinkable for him. The extremes of individualism and socialism are ever before present and are manifested in different ways, as perhaps individualism has become more radicalized. The imbalances between personal and collective needs are increasing because species and seemingly without solution, as I said at the beginning. An emblematic case of this seems to me the COVID pandemic. The lack of balance between listening to one's own conscience and collective needs has generated splits in the individual in terms of psychic imbalance, but also in the social fabric to which the person belongs, through scapegoat phenomena and generalized panic over alleged dangers from the other. I take this example not at random, not only because of its temporal proximity to us, but also because of the prominence of a collective entity started by Stein, namely the state. If in fact, as the first community entities called upon to contribute actively and consciously to the educational processes of individuals are clearly considered by Stein to be the family and the school, the contribution that the state community offers in this process does not remain secondary for the Camelot. It is the state that acts as the guarantor of school and educational institutions in general, allowing them to be established, sustained, and secure. It is the state that even before that becomes the guarantor of the existence of families and the freedom of education and upbringing of its citizens, induced of the community fabric that constitutes it. Stein is very clear and concrete in this aspect, listing precisely the tasks of the state, and I quote, "The state that must first concern itself with the civic education of young people, that is, with training them in a sense of duty and sacrifice to the state. Second, it must value the productive capacity of its citizens, and it must value the best possible training of body and mind, guys. Third, most effectively creates a bond amongst its citizens by taking care of their needs, including the highest needs of mind and soul," end of quote. When a state values and adequately contributes to the training and education of its citizens, we are dealing with a healthy entity, because it is capable of growing and developing. Individual members are enabled to do so personally, although it remains the freedom of one or the other not to understand its value and take advantage of it. Within the reflections on social education, the state dimension, which follows the family and school dimension in its immediate impact on the individual, therefore also applies value, because it is the guarantor of the other entities and be understood as a key in educational development. We have again a circularity between individual and community, private and public sphere. The family is the fourth educating community, since every individual is generally born within a family unit and spends the first years of life there. It is in the first community nucleus that values and rules are learned, and not only do one's body and affections begin to develop, but also the spiritual dimension. The presence of brothers and sisters is a further element of support for the development of self-education, since their presence induces an immediate interaction with other human beings, while not reference always in a superior position in terms of responsibility, but appears entitled to equal rights and duties in the family fabric. The educational value of such cohabitation is recognized as the first essential and natural interaction with other peers that is fundamental for every person, since what is not learned in the small community context, due to the most varied circumstances, is learned, if it is learned at all, with much difficulty later on. I quote Stein, "To give up, to share with others, as they will have to do later in life, if they do not want to wear themselves out in constant struggles, and as is necessary for the formation of their character. This must be learned early on, and it's very difficult to learn when the child grows up alone." End of quote. The family, however, is not enough on its own for the individual's formative process. Engagement with the surrounding world is necessary, not least because the members of a family do not have the capacity to provide all those goods, not so much material, but about spiritual, that individual needs to be properly immersed in. Above all, it is fundamental to be able to feel part of a whole, within which every family finds its place, which is the community of a people. A whole history of events, customs, language, values are proper to a people, and it is within that they are learned by each member unconsciously in interaction with its other members. The cohesive and self-conscious community of the people then matures into a state structure by hierarchies of authority and tasks. Here, the central feeling that must prevail for Stein is self-denial. That means the ability to set aside interests, desires, particular needs for the good of the community, and trusting this good to one who also acts as its guarantor. Such a feeling is not spontaneous in everyone, but must be cultivated in a process of education to sociality. In Christianity, then, the family is supported by the church and the community of believers, While parents can already contribute to development and maturation of the spiritual dimension of faith, it is only in the church community that the individual experiences Israel belonging to the community of believers. It is there that he or she can fully experience the community dimension of the Christian faith and receive greater formation as a Christian. Finally, and I will only sketch because I have only 2 minutes, the school is introduced in sharp distinction from the previous areas. It is not a natural or sacred supernatural community, but a social institution created for a specific purpose. It serves, I quote, shrine the people and humanity in that its task is to transmit cultural goods, to pass on the future of what the past and present have produced, end of quote. It does this by employing people who acquire a range of knowledge and skills, who by becoming specialized trainers, teachers, have the task to accompany the educational process of individuals while forming them in a sense of community. In the school, a place is established in which each individual can develop individual and social energies. An educating community capable of intervening in a differentiated manner, depending on the backgrounds of its members, helping them to develop talents and skills for living together. Ultimately, the work of social formation aims to bring communities of whatever kind back to their original meaning by properly forming their members. Streich goes on to define what this type of formation should look like. It is a matter of developing approaches and methods that know how to hold together the different blends of the human and above all each person's specific characteristic of belonging to humanity, either here being specifically related to that humanity that is male or female, and either here being absolutely unique and not mistaken for others. Paradoxically, it is precisely the correct attention to individuality with an education capable of accompanying its blossoming that allows for an adequate social formation. I quote again, by observing the person being educated, the way he looks, his attitude, what he says and how he says it, that is the bodily and interior posture he assumes in the educational experience, it will also be possible for the educator to gradually develop a disposition to empathy, end of quote. Looking then at the school, Steiner argues that its task is precisely to train children and young people to form a community, in which each assumes a role corresponding to either their individuality. And in this way, they must be capable of fitting equally well into communities to which they will belong or into which they will later have to incorporate themselves. For this to happen, teachers must play their part. That is, they must have first worked on their own self-formation to the point of being aware of their individuality, of how much they know and can give, and of being in communion with God. These two premises will allow them to already enter into community with the children before knowing them, since they will be recognized as God's children on a par with the teachers and as such loved and wanted by God. So, and we'll end it because I have to go on, the time is over. I will only say at the end that this is possible. The vision of Edith Stein is correct and really available also for today if this state dimension I cited before really assume its role, supporting schools, supporting teachers and families in their work. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Valentina Galdiano, for this excellent presentation. We are sorry we are restricted by the time, but thank you very much for this. And if you have any questions or comments after the second presenter's communication, you can ask or make any comments you wish. Well, now it is time to present briefly. Sorry, I made a little summary of your excellent CV, very, very rich, and I try to summarize and describe a few highlights of Professor Dr. William Edward Tullius. Well, Dr. Tullius belongs to the American public university system, in Charlestown, West Virginia, United States. He belongs to the Department of Philosophy, and his areas of competence and specialization are, among others, medical philosophy, particularly Duns Scotus and Anson, philosophy of religion, ethics, phenomenology, particularly Husserl, Scheller, and Stein, and personalism. He's a doctor in philosophy, and his thesis dissertation was on groundwork to a phenomenological ethics in Edmund Husserl and Duns Scotus. Among his awards and honors are different scholarships from the University of Dallas, New School for Social Research. Well, I've summarized his research interests because I think it could be important for the present attenders to this conference. His past and current research has evolved around the question of the essential foundations of the experience of ethical normativity and obligation, since these are related to basic problems of the motivation and structure of subjectivity. In pursuing these problems, he has worked within the phenomenological and personalist traditions, borrowing from the insights of the early phenomenological thinkers, particularly those of Edith Stein, the protagonist of this conference, as well as those of Scheller and Husserl. He's also interested in incorporating the insights of ancient and medieval thinkers, particularly Plato, Aristotle, and Duns Scotus, into his studies. His future research, as he envisions that, is seeking to develop a theory for the phenomenological and metaphysical foundations of ethics, developed by the way of a Hegelian philosophy of history. Among his many publications are, for example, among the most recent ones, Person and Spirit on the ethical and pedagogical implications of Edith Stein's Christian personalism, Time, Eternity, and the Transition from Phenomenology of Metaphysics in Edith Stein, Edmund Husserl, and Eric Vogelin, and Edith Stein and the Ethics of Renewal, Contributions to a Steinian Account of the Moral Class, among others. He has other papers under review, a recent book is going to be published. I think it's interesting for the conference contributions. On the ethical philosophy of Edith Stein, Outlines of Morality. Interesting contribution, I think, to these studies on Edith Stein. He has a long list of conference presentations and courses taught in different universities in the States and in other countries. He has, by the way, contributed to the cause of the proclamation of Edith Stein as future women doctor if the church recognizes that, because he prepared a scholarly report on the work and legacy of Edith Stein, a contribution to the work of the Teresianum Pontifical Theological Faculties Project, preparing an official dossier to serve as the basis for the postulatory letter to petition of the Pope to name Edith Stein as a doctor of the Church, which was presented this morning. He's a member of different professional societies, such as the Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy, North American Society for Early Phenomenology, the International Association for the Study of Edith Stein, of course, and the American Catholic Philosophical Association. Well, with this long CV, which was summarized, Professor Tullius, you have the word just to present your communication. The title is Race and Education, a Steinian Vision for Human Development. Welcome.
Thank you. And I'd like to begin first by extending my thanks to the organizers of the conference. I had originally proposed this paper as a paper, not as a roundtable. I was invited to extend it and present it in this format. I think partly for the reason that this is an important topic, and Stein makes an important contribution to it, and they saw the value in that to a greater extent than perhaps I did in proposing it as a paper. So thank you very much. Edith Stein published an investigation concerning the state in 1925, incidentally the same year as Hitler's Mein Kampf appeared, and in which she, among other things, touches upon the relationship of the state to racial and ethnic community, albeit in a radically opposed way from Hitler. Stein's early analysis in this work adumbrates the problem of what, in a 1933 letter to Pope Pius XI, she would later passionately describe as a crisis of the idolization of race, the roots of which were already becoming visible in the early years of the Weimar Republic. Stein couched this early contribution to the philosophy of race within her political philosophy, the results of which affirmed the value of a multi-ethnic polity, a point of which was obvious significance to her as both a Jew and as a German. Later, however, Stein would shift her focus away from political philosophy as the primary theoretical space within which to consider the problems of racism. In her lectures for the Deutschen Institut für Wissenschaftliche Pädagogik during the winter of 1932 to 1933, Stein would address race within the context of a philosophy of education that would draw upon the results of the phenomenological and metaphysical research that she had carried out throughout her preceding works. The reason for this shift seems to be embedded within the political and ethical analysis which she had earlier carried out in her work on the state, however. The reason primarily being that racism is, as Stein will develop it, a moral problem, and the state is incapable through purely legal political means of dealing with problems of morality, at least in a direct way. Racism as a moral phenomenon then can only be eradicated through essentially personal rather than impersonal political legal acts carried out either individually or solidarily in community with others. Since racism is understood here as sin, that is, as an act that erodes solidarity and that disturbs the equilibrium of the world, racism can be actually eradicated only via acts of repentance and reforming the structures of personal interiority and its proper responsiveness to the order of true values, including especially the absolute value of persons, and persons not only as individual or radically incommunicable beings, but also developing out of that in as much as they also belong to and express certain racial value as well. So in this paper, I investigate the theme of race in Stein's philosophy. I argue that Stein's philosophy of race and philosophy of education each make important contributions to our understanding of the work still to be done in education in developing a full consciousness of the values of all persons in meeting the problems of racism today. In exploring these themes, I will first situate Stein's thought concerning the phenomenon of race as she proposes it in an investigation concerning the state, and finally in finite and eternal being. From there, I will proceed with an exploration of the ways in which Stein reasserts the race theme in the context of her philosophy of education, and will conclude with some reflections on how education is to serve as at least a part of Stein's answer to the moral problem of racism. Okay. Preliminarily, a discussion of the phenomenon of racism in light of Stein's work must acknowledge a degree of ambiguity in the language of race, ethnicity, and racism. So I need to qualify a little bit of what I'm doing here. In touching upon the themes of what today we might refer to as the philosophy of race, Stein does not often refer to race, Rasse in German, or racism, Rassismus. She does refer in her letter to Pope Pius XI to the idolization of race, Vergötzung der Rasse. However, her relationship to the idea of race is somewhat complicated. Where Stein's work deals with the problems of a philosophy of race, she prefers to discuss the idea of a folk or a people or ethnic community, as it might be translated. When we perhaps more loosely speak of race and ethnicity in connection with the themes and moral challenges of racism today, we can understand Stein's use of the term folk and her critical analysis of the relationship of folk to the state to embrace many of the themes by which contemporary Anglophone discourse, at least, endeavors to adumbrate the themes of race and racial prejudice. Thus, I will understand Stein's discussion of the idea of a folk to involve discussions of ethnic and racialized communities in the contemporary sense. Now, keeping this in mind, in an investigation concerning the state, Stein discusses the relationship of the folk to the state. Drawing upon Shaler and Tönnies, Stein presupposes three forms of sociality in which the person may participate: the mass, the community, Gemeinschaft, and association or society, Gesellschaft. Community is marked by the essentially personal relationship of its members to one another as fellow subjects, while association or society is a rationalization or mechanization of communal life tending towards objectifying personal relations for some purpose or some particular goal. Although associations represent distinct social forms from communities, they are always founded upon a prior, really existing community in order to be as associations to societies at all. Thus, the state for Stein is a form of association. So then in asking about the relation of the ethnic or racial community to the state, Stein must not only ask how the idea of a folk stands towards the political structure of the state in which the individuals subject to its control may or may not participate, but more fundamentally, she must ask about the relationship of the folk to the community of life that bears the state's associational functions. The question seems to be, fundamentally, whether the community that forms the basis for a state need be racialized for the state to arise in the first place. Initially, for Stein, the ethnic community and the community in which the state association is founded appear to be formally separate from one another, since a folk does not need to have a state in order to be as a folk. She cites the example of the Polish people, who were even more unified and confirmed in their consciousness of being Poles after the dissolution of the Polish state in the 19th century. Moreover, the particular phenomenon of the ethnic state is not the only possible formation open to a state as such. A multi-ethnic community, as in the Roman Empire, is a good example. However, certain considerations do force Stein to concede that it is more difficult to answer the issue of whether or not the state is separate from some ethnic community as its ontic basis. Or to put it more clearly, whether the life community that founds any given state must always already have been an ethnic or racial one. There is, on the one hand, the empirical reality of racial or ethnic tensions between groups within multi-ethnic polities, as well as, on the other hand, the historical reality that within such polities, specific ethnic communities have at some time exclusively held the center of both official and unofficial power. For example, it was the Italo-Roman folk who formed the basis of the Roman state. Likewise, in the early United States of America, those who wielded political, economic, and social power, and thus who recognized themselves as Americans, were exclusively Anglo-Saxon peoples. Only later could non-Italo-Romans or non-Anglo-Saxons come to occupy state functions in their respective societies and could see themselves as Romans or Americans. Now, in the aftermath of World War I and the collapse of the German Empire, the question that is tacitly in play is, for Stein at least, does Germany require ethnic Germans to serve as the bearers of its state functions in order to be Germany at all? If so, then what place might there be for ethnic minorities like the Jews within those parts of the former German Empire that still remained under the political and legal control of the Germans? What is their relation to the German state? For that matter, what is their relation to the Germans themselves? For Stein, analysis of the ontic structure of the state does not permit any answer to these questions. As she puts it, quote, the ontic composition of the state leaves open the issue of how the persons within it might stand to one another. From analysis of these, end quote, from the analysis of the spirituality of the person and its essential interpersonal relationality, Stein knows that a state can exist only on the basis of an already existing community, and that community ties are essentially necessary for a state to exist. But they need not be of an ethnic or racial sort. Yet the analysis of this relationship and the further question of whether in the absence of a multi-ethnic community, the state requires that some single developed ethnic community serve as its basis, and thus whether or not the possible integration of a foreign element, for example, immigrants or refugees, would represent a threat to the state, remains naive without a more targeted analysis of the essence of ethnic community as such. Addressing this head-on, Stein holds that a folk, quote, comprises an open multiplicity of individuals, end quote, and that multiplicity is indifferent to the personal particularity of its members. Yet, for an ethnic community to be as a community at all, there must be a we orientation and openness to the group. Ethnic community must therefore entail a continual mediation of solidarity among those elements separated in space and time. That's a quote. That is a feeling of belonging to and with the community such that, quote, every member of the ethnic community must bear the imprint of his or her membership in it, at least in the fact that the member represents the ethnic type, end quote. This means that one's belonging to an ethnic group may be somewhat fluid rather than static. That is, in principle, I can leave my people and become enculturated into some other ethnic community. However, by bearing the imprint of the community within oneself, the member of this or that racial or ethnic group will form a part of a community that does, in some sense, possess, quote, one uniform ethnic character, captured in the distinctive culture that emerges from out of its shared life. Indeed, it is essential for an ethnic community to be culturally creative for Stein, as it is the culture rather than physical morphography, blood ties, etc., that constitutes the unique identity of the folk. The folk is thus, quote, a personality with creative distinctiveness, end quote, and even possessing a certain right to sovereignty as the condition for the expression of its spiritual subjectivity. Thus, where a state does not in fact provide conditions for the cultural creativity of an ethnic group within it, or in other words, where there are elements of structural racism, as we might put it today, there seems to be a genuine ethical claim that the ethnic community could make for its right to self-rule in some form, either to constitute its own ethnic state or to have an equal right to participation in the regulation of the society in which they are minority members. One can feel here something of Stein's sympathy for the nationalist hopes of the ethnic minorities like the Poles in the aftermath of the Great War, who had previously been denied the right of self-rule or of equal participation in the political life of the imperial states under which they were subjects. One can also feel the extent to which Stein's work is meant to be read as a defense of her own Jewish people and their right to be a part of the national life of a post-war German republic, without at the same time being required to sacrifice their right to be culturally creative precisely as Jews. What is existentially and morally necessary for the state, then, is to organize itself into a, quote, civic organization that takes the ethnic communities within it, intrinsic lawfulness into account, end quote. Where there is a failure to accommodate an ethnic community within the pattern of the political, economic, and national life, the existence of each will become imperiled, Stein holds. Stein's early commitment to the value of racial diversity here would become an integral part of her later philosophy. In the concluding sections of Finite and Eternal Being, Stein argues that it is a part of my vocation as an individual person to develop an acute consciousness of the reality that I'm a member not only of narrow communities, for example, a family, a city, a nation, or a church, but that I am also a member of and bear responsibility for humanity universally. Humanity, or humanitas, is an essential and permanent fact of my essential nature. Yet it takes a heightened moral sense to intuit the depth of our responsibility for humanity, especially where the universal human community is construed to include not only others of my own culture, race, and ethnicity, but most especially the foreign other. This, in fact, is quite important for developing one's personality. For example, to come to acute consciousness that one is German and belongs to the German community, French and belongs to the French community, Spanish and belongs to the Spanish community, etc., is quite significant for understanding something of who one is and how one belongs with and to a community of others. Thus, recognizing my immersion within an ethnic community and demarcating something of the narrow context in which I live my life initially appears axiologically ambivalent. Yet she writes, quote, to gain an acute awareness of humanity or humankind as of the totality which encompasses and sustains it, it is of signal importance for us to realize experientially that common bond which links us, notwithstanding all the differences, with peoples and individuals of every age and clime, and to be conscious of the fact that by our own contact with foreign members of the human race, our own being is enriched and perfected, end quote. Yet insofar as my awareness of ethnic belonging may be construed as in some tension with a particular group of foreign others, my particular folk consciousness can potentially obscure this recognition of universal human dignity. Now, all of this is important for illustrating the moral trouble that racism signifies, as well as for signaling the fact that each ethnic community in its unique cultural creativity bears a distinctive value that in fact is necessary to complete humanity as a whole. Thus, to close oneself off to another on account of their race is not only to violate the other's dignity as a human being, but it is also, in addition, a failure to recognize the genuinely positive value that the other bears precisely because they belong to this or that ethnic community. Racism also has the additional effect of closing myself off from encounter with that which is actually necessary to complete and to perfect my own humanity. In the discovery of the full richness of human value that can only be discerned in the encounter with the ethnic or racial other, but whom I instead reject or hate on account of their particular ethnic difference and value. All right, so this spans the whole of Stein's work from the work on the state to finite and eternal being. In the interim between these two works, Stein returns to the analysis of race and ethnicity in Der Aufgabe menschlichen Person. Here, Stein's argument tacitly has National Socialism's anti-Semitic racial ideology critically in mind, approaching the problem with an eye towards racism now as a special problem for pedagogy. For Stein, a human being is the being that can and therefore also ought to form itself, she says at the beginning of her lecture. The task of education, or Erziehungsarbeit, from the perspective of the educator, is to provide the external impetus for the formation of the human being, by means of which the educated person may autonomously fulfill the ought of self-formation. Such formation, however, is not merely the acquisition of technical abilities requisite for successful movement within the world, but is first and foremost the attunement of the person to the whole order of values. To form one's character requires proper organization of the whole essential structure of the human being, an attunement to value that is necessary for the unfolding of the person in her essential human and individually personal possibilities. With this as her point of departure, Stein's discussion of race re-echoes much of her analysis of the relation of the ethnic community to the state as she had tackled it in an investigation concerning the state. However, two new issues do stand out as particularly important as it pertains to the role of education in addressing the moral and personal relational problems posed by racism, especially where Stein conceives education as fundamentally, even if not exclusively, a moral project of personal formation and self-formation. She makes a key distinction between the controversial concept of a race, Rasse, one of the only times she uses the term, that's primarily a concept of blood relationship, and the concept of folk. I won't go into that in detail, because I have 2 minutes left. But in the context of this, she's clarifying a critique of National Socialist ideology. And she also goes on to discuss the problem of folk and folk consciousness in terms of this special vocation to realize unique values. And the way that education is meant to condition this by elaborating for us certain essential realizations. What a well-rounded education, Stein insists upon, what it should accomplish is to make us aware of history, and she talks particularly of the history of the German people, how they don't arise out of nowhere, but rather part of what makes the German culture what it is the influence of specifically Irish and English missionaries coming and bringing with them cultural forms and cultural artifacts from the past that include the heritage of Christianity, heritage of Greek and Roman culture, philosophy, and crucially here for Stein, as responding to National Socialist ideology, it includes the Judeo-Christian tradition and therefore the contribution of the Jewish people to making Germany what it is. So in other words, historical education should alert us to the fact that our own cultural and the values that we produce, this is founded upon other values that alert us to the value of others that perhaps we hate. And in addition to that, Stein also says that things like literature alert us to empathy, to the value of other forms of life that are contemporaneous with us, that perhaps we don't have this historical foundation or relationship that should be a reason not to hate the other. And finally, also, she says Empathy in this respect naturally undermines the subjective conditions for any idolization of race as we find in Nazism, white supremacy, etc. But she insists, and this is, I think, crucial, that it takes participation in an act of love for the other to overcome racism fully, since the person is revealed in the fullest sense only in love for Stein. All right, so just concluding, as Stein had argued to Pope Pius XI, racism is first and foremost a moral and religious offense. It violates the possibility of genuine human community and offends the image of God in humanity. Yet the answer to racism cannot be found merely in acts of moral conversion and repentance, however foundational those must be. Indeed, while such personal acts are necessary for the renewal of humanity and the restoration of solidarity in the face of injustice generally, education also has an important role to play in undermining the spiritual conditions that stand in the way of contrition by permitting one to recognize the genuine value of each and every people, and most especially of each and every individual person who is both a representative member of their whole and is also infinitely more than such a larger part of the whole. Through education, we must recognize that each person possesses an equal share in humanity, or that humanity coincides with every human being, every individual person. Likewise, we must appreciate that the person alongside the incommensurable and incommunicable dignity that each possesses as person also possesses a unique value as a representative of a racial ethnic group that adds to the total fabric of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tullius, for your presentation. And now we have a few minutes just for any questions you might ask any of the two presenters. So feel free. We have given you some papers. If you wish to write a question or something, we collect the papers and try to make a selection or perhaps find coincidences in order for them to answer. Those of you who are connected, I'm not sure if you want to ask any questions too. Can you use the mouse there in order to see if there are some questions from the people connected? There are 4 people connected. Okay, so just feel free just to use the chat to ask any questions if you are just listening or you would like to make any comments. Yes, or this microphone, is it working? We hope so. Yes, okay, go ahead.
I had a question for you about, I teach a lot of single mothers, and I noticed that in part of your paper, Stein talked about how being alone, and I'm not sure if you define alone, how you define that, and also how Stein's own experience as a losing her own father was part of what shaped her. And well, I guess I'm just asking, what do we do in a society where there are a lot of single mothers or single parents and their children are coming to school? So
Are you collecting more questions?
More questions here?
Sí, collecting questions and collect the questions. Yes, okay. Meanwhile, if you want to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for this question, really important question and difficult to answer. Because as I know, I cannot remember if Stein said something exactly to such a case of a mother alone. sure, it was very, very important from each time her personal experience. I think here educational items and writings or speech, because we have almost speech about education, are very, very influenced for a personal experience, a family, and also for a teaching experience. She had a great family. She had brothers and sisters, a mother and father, but as you said, she lost her father as she was 2 years. So I think she had then directly an experience with a mother alone, growing there. And I think her experience was positive in this sense. And I think as I spoke about, to be alone, to grow up alone, I was meaning as she really looked at the family as a complex of persons, not only mother and father, it's most important, because we don't have children without a mother and a father, because today we can have many, many other ways to become children, but besides, but especially the presence of sisters and brothers. So I think today, perhaps, it's not only the question of a single mother, but much more of families that are one child. So she was looking at this special experience, because we have two different influences. Parents have a responsibility, are always superior in such a way, because they have their personal paths of information before you. So they can give you some information more and comment from the experience. But the peer experience, so with other children, peer as you, in this growing process, you can have this experience if you have brothers and sisters, or if you go to the kindergarten, so to the institutions where we are in this experience. So I find their focus is much more on these items. And mother alone, that is also an answer from Stein if we look at a complex of people or organizations that are important for our growing process. We don't have only family. She starts from the family, because there is the first nucleus for us. But only family is not enough. And she goes directly through the family on the church, so on a greater community around family, and also to friends and other communities. So I think today is also important that families and these other entities are working much intertwined. This, I think, is in the vision of each time important and interesting. But I don't know.
Thank you, Professor Gaudiano. And now it is the turn, it is Dr. Tulio's turn, because the two questions we have collected, they are addressed to him. So
And the questions are both very closely related, so I'm going to, I'll read both and respond to them both at the same time, hopefully. So the first question is, how does Stein define racism? Her response to it seems to require, or the response to it seems to require not just the absence of animosity, but also the presence of a sort of welcoming response. Does racism include ambivalence then? Can it be a sin of omission? And the second question is, what would Stein say about trying to look beyond race or ignoring race? What would be the implications for education? So I tried to sort of make a caveat at the beginning of the paper that Stein never uses the word racism. I have a reading knowledge of German, but not a sort of philological knowledge of the history of German language, so I'm not sure whether the word racismo existed in Stein's time or not, or if this is a more recent coinage. But what I take it is that Stein is largely addressing concerns that today we lump under the term racism. And I think that yes, her response to it seems to require not just the absence of animosity, and I think this is part of what the response of education to racism is meant to consist in, that it's forming and shaping the personality of the student through the study of history, through the study of literature in particular, those are the two things that she mentions most explicitly, in order to comprehend and it's not just to comprehend, but to affirm, have a value response in the sense of teacher von Hildebrand, which is, and she also uses that kind of language in other places, so I think it's appropriate to Stein's thought. Have a value response, a positive affirmation of the value of the ethnic or racial other. I think that is something that is required as the response to racism, which also means that in a sense, it's not sufficient when in the English discourse over, Anglophone discourse over the question of racism, we often hear people saying that they strive to be colorblind, not to see color. I don't see race is something that people often will say in response to questions of structural racism or in the United States, white supremacy, these sorts of things. And I think that Stein would want to say this is insufficient. That it can't be a response of just ignore people and treat everyone as though they're the same. That this sort of reduces us to a bare humanity, which although we have to have this commitment to humanity as such and feel a responsibility for humanity, for Stein, humanity is it's an essence that must unfold. And it must unfold in history through the elaboration of human possibilities that can't be instantiated in any one individual and can't be instantiated in any one group. But we require the whole plenitude of ethnic and racial groups that have ever existed in the history of the world, that currently exist, and that will exist in the future, in order to unfold those possibilities in time. And perhaps in the course of history, those possibilities won't ever fully be unfolded. But I think at any rate, Stein envisions humanity's development in those terms, that each race, each people is necessary for the completion of humanity, and therefore to feel this responsibility for humanity, education needs to inculcate within us an attitude of positive appreciation, positive response to each and every group that is out there. And so in terms of education, I think the implication is that we need to respond to positive instances of racism in whichever countries we might live by including in the curriculum some study, whether it's history or literature or whatever it may be, that enables us to grasp and to respond to that positive value that's there, that for whatever reason our society is blind to.
Thank you. Each of the races are pieces of a puzzle, and each of the pieces fits. Okay. Well, two last questions. One addressed to Professor Gordiano. If you wish
Yes,
to read the
I hope to understand the question. You mentioned the rise of autism and narcissism, diseases as related to a failure of social formation, and perhaps a lack of self-knowledge. What do you think? Which comes first? Which causes which? Which comes first? As I really understand Edith Stein's thought, they come both at the same time. There isn't a real anticipation of one of them. So social formation and self-formation, self-knowledge are both really important.
So according to what I said before about the circularity between individuality and community, our human structure is so built that we are open to and we need a relationship with other people. So only self-knowledge is not enough. Only social formation or communitarian formation is not enough. Because if we are looking only at oneself, we can come to this risk to autism and or narcissism. If we only put, and this is important for teachers and educators, she said they have to balance these two aspects. So in teaching, in educating a teacher and educator has to look the personal capacity of the child, of the single child, talents, capacities, and possibilities, and helping him or her to grow in this self-knowledge. Oh, that's what I can. This is a talent. I'm good in this task. But at the same time, and with this balancing, looking what this child can do and develop according to the community. And so to become to a point where you are capable to put by side something what's important for you, because there is something else more important for the community. And when this is important for the community, it's also important for you. So I would answer, they are both important, and that's why I wanted to develop this topic, because I find today we are walking on these both extremisms, but we need to bring them together exactly in this balancing. It's really, really a challenge, and it's really difficult for a teacher to do this job. And that's why I said a teacher as a mother alone is not enough. He or she needs a complex, an entire society working on the same direction, on the same path.
Thank you. And then the very, very, very last comment or question is addressed to Professor Julius, so he'll try to respond. More philosophical question.
There was a question in regard to my comment about Stein's point that the person can form themselves and therefore ought to form themselves. And the question was, ought to form themselves in what sense? Is the ought, what sense is the ought in Stein? A categorical imperative or hypothetical imperative? Now Stein, at least as I read her, she is, when she does ethics, she's working largely in conversation with the phenomenological tradition. She's definitely shaped in a lot of her ideas about ethics by contact with the work of Max Scheler, and therefore is also informed by Scheler's critique of Kant. So I think that largely she would want to avoid the language of either categorical or hypothetical imperative, as we would find in the Kantian tradition. Now she does have one comment about Kant in Finite and Eternal Being, and the idea of the ought, where Kant he proposes this idea that I ought, therefore I can. There's this relation between possibility and obligation that runs in the direction of I have the ought, the obligation, therefore I can do it. I can fulfill the ought. Stein says, well, we can understand the sense of that, the sense of which it's true, what Kant says, only by appeal to grace. That the grace that God gives us is that which provides us that impetus, that spiritual energy to fulfill what we are otherwise incapable of doing on our own. So that's her one positive comment about Kant. Now, I think in what sense does Stein use the language of the ought? I think it's probably closer to the Schlerian notion of the ideal ought, that is, the response to values that call to me to fulfill them. And in this sense, I think it's the value, well, constellation of values but I think at the forefront of those is the value of of your own self. That is, that you have the possibility to become the person that God calls you to be, and as God calls you. And so you ought to fulfill that by working at yourself and forming and shaping your personality to coordinate with that, that value intuition.
Thank you, Professor Salviano and Julius, for responding these questions and for just sharing with us your research, your study, profound insights about Stein and education. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the present attendants of the roundtable. It's late evening, time for dinner. And before saying see you tomorrow, we give the the role and the word to the student who is going to give you a few more practical announcements. Thank you for being present with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After today, we remind you that tomorrow we will resume the session at 9:15 in the auditorium of Universidad Católica de Ávila. Thus attending the conference while staying at IASPES, I invite you to have dinner at the center. The dining room class closes at 10:30.
So time to go to CITES for dinner. Have a good rest tonight. It has been an intensive day. Thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.